Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the White Knuckle Podcast, powered by Ozonics. Undetectable, undeniable. Well, hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to the White Knuckle Podcast, episode number 45. I say it every time I mention the number of episodes that we've done. I can't believe we've already done 45. I just want to take a second to just sort of recap where everybody's at. Today is the 12th of November. Happy late Veterans Day. The rut is in full swing. In Wisconsin here, it seems like for the most part, everything's on lockdown from what I'm hearing from everybody out there. The bucks that they are seeing are few and far between, and there's not been a ton of activity. My guess is the next 4 or 5 days here are going to be getting good again when some of those bucks break loose. So I'm not sure what you're seeing in your area. If you want to comment on what you are seeing in your area, go to our Facebook page and just leave a comment about what's going on in your area. Today we have a guest in Brad Lamont that has become kind of a buddy of mine. We met professionally here not that long ago, as he sort of works in the same industry that I do. He works more in the regulatory wing of the car business, so we get to cross paths every once in a while, and that's always fun, especially since we both love to hunt. I've known Brad to be a pretty sharp guy, and certainly a student of the certainly a student of the craft. So with that, let's get on with my interview with Mr. Brad Lamont. Well, hey, everybody, welcome back to the White Knuckle Podcast. Today, I am joined with Brad Lamont. Brad is a guy that I've gotten to know over the last couple of years, first through the White Knuckle site and just White Knuckle in general, and then our paths crossed in the professional world as well. Brad, how's it going?
Oh, it's pretty good.
Good. How's your season gone this far?
You know, there was definitely some ups and downs, but things kind of lined up and came together for me, and we were able to get it done.
Really? What did you end up with?
Well, I hunt exclusively on public land. I used to have a pretty good spot, and things just kind of changed, circumstances change, and I decided I wanted to kind of test myself and see if I could actually do it on public land, and so I just I went on like forums like the Hunting Beast and Saddle Hunter, and just kind of learned as I went, and just put in miles and miles and miles of scouting, and I was actually able to close the deal on a pretty nice 7-pointer, a real busted up buck on October 29th.
Okay. And how long did you say that you have been hunting public?
This is my second full season.
Second full season?
Yeah, I've hunted off and on over the years, and I'd killed a few bucks here and there, but nothing with any real size to them. And more than anything, it was mostly accidental, just kind of right place at the right time. But I couldn't really tell you what I necessarily did right in those past experiences.
You mentioned that you switched to public hunting. What made you do that? I mean, what was the driving force behind that? And then a follow-up question behind that: would you ever hunt private land again?
Yeah, I would definitely. I'm going to answer the second one first. I would definitely consider it under certain circumstances. Part of it was, I think, as we mature as hunters, it's important to kind of try new things, whether it's different weapons or different tactics or, that sort of thing. And so I think this is where I'm at. I killed a few nice bucks here and there on the private land, and I think this was just kind of the next step. And then when I decided to take this leap, you just kind of have your resources and that, and you kind of jump all in. I think with public, you got to do it all or kind of not at all. I think you can only halfway do things and expect decent luck so many times. And but it's one of those things where it was just losing access to a pretty nice farm I had. That was what actually kind of directed me this way. And so far, I'm really, really enjoying it, and just trying new tactics. It's definitely, some things are easier on public, and some things are definitely trickier.
You mentioned, resources, and having, gone through the process myself this year, resources definitely are huge. What resources would you tell the listeners are important? Maybe not just for public land, maybe for private as well, but if it's public, just if it's more beneficial if you're a public land hunter, mention that. But what resources do you use?
Sure. Back in 2011, I discovered Dan Infalt's site, huntingbeast.com, and I just kind of dove into that with both feet, and there's just a wealth of knowledge on there. And then through that, it kind of opened other doors. I was used to other forums where there was as much bickering and stuff as there was useful information. And, I kind of discovered guys like John Eberhard and certainly Todd. And then that led me to White Knuckle Productions. Been watching the web shows for years, the DVDs. And you just kind of see what's working for people. It doesn't necessarily have to be just public land. Actually, I hunt a lot of the way I used to. I think it really transforms well over to the public side of it. But just being a mobile hunter, just kind of trying to have a lot more spots than you need to have. And, there was a lot of books that we discussed on there. Mapping Trophy Whitetails was a good one. Of course, John Eberhart had some good ones. And you just kind of, you network. I think as hunters, networking is huge. And just opens, one door opens three other doors, it seems. And, I think the hunters that are successful are never closed-minded. They're always looking for the next thing.
Absolutely, I would agree. Like I said, having gone through the process this year, all the things that you're saying are ringing true to me. Anything else that you can think of in terms of resources that you had to pay for that maybe you just found for free, whatever the case may be?
Sure. I'm a big fan of just YouTube in general, too. You kind of got to sort through things with an open mind. I mean, some stuff is, probably not where you want to take your advice from, but there's a group of guys up there, public land hunters. They're based out of Wisconsin. They do a real good job. And then Bill Winke actually has a series out I discovered a few years ago on Roku called Chasing November. And there was a couple of guys on there that really got into the public land side of things and, just absorbing info like that. Sometimes you pick up on something and you just kind of stow it away and you may not need it, but a year or two, it kind of pops up and you're able to implement it into a hunt. And, you just never know where you're going to wind up. But I think the biggest thing is just having an open mind. The other thing is you hate to sound kind of negative towards the way the industry is headed, but I enjoy the shows as much as anybody, the magazines and stuff, but it's just, you kind of got to sort through it with, an open mind on that. Some of that stuff isn't necessarily going to help you do anything. And you just kind of got to know how to separate the good from the bad and take what you need and leave what you don't.
Exactly. What are the most valuable tools that you've got, in your opinion?
I think, when I started hunting, it took me 5 years before I ever got a shot at a deer with a bow. And one thing that really contributed back then was I was always hunting the same couple of stands. I was in high school and even getting out of high school, money's tight and that. The thing that really opened the door for me was when I kind of became a more mobile hunter. Back then I had a climber, and of course it was loud and clumsy and heavy. And then I kind of, as I went on, I got into the lone wolf side of things and, started picking up a few here and there. And honestly, I think my lone wolf stands are just, they're kind of everything else is based off of them. When I scout, I'm picking trees based on what stand I feel I need to use in that spot, and whether it's my climber or I have a little lone wolf assassin. I don't think those are on the market anymore, but if a guy can find one, those are kind of a handy tool. But then, this year, just using my climber, I kind of got into a different side of hunting that we can kind of discuss maybe later on in the show, using a canoe, and that just opened up a whole new world to me. And it's amazing what can happen when you put some water or something between you and the competition and that. And then from there on out, just, I've tried everything from different packs and that to be able to carry in the essentials. I generally travel pretty light. Other resources would be, I think a guy really needs a GPS or a real good GPS where you can save the spots. Certainly the mapping tools that you can get online, Google Earth and some of those. It seems like I'm always looking at maps. I can't tell you how many times I've been laying in bed playing on the mapping sites and trying to figure out what works for a certain wind and how you're going to access it. And, those things just come in really handy. And then like I think it's called Onyx maps on the phones, just stuff like that. You can't really put a price on stuff like that. It's, as a mobile hunter and especially as a public land hunter, I think those are very important assets to have on your side.
Yeah, absolutely. I found them, especially the GPS, invaluable. Invaluable for a couple of reasons. One, it keeps you from getting lost in the dark, which I hate. And two, you're able to mark, you're able to sort of drop pins or waypoints every time you find sign, and then you get back home and you're able to dump it into your computer. I don't know if you do that as well. And I can see where, when I talked with Curtis Saville, when we did our public land series earlier this summer, he had mentioned, doing that. And I can see where, coming up here in February, March, April, going back to those places that I hunted, that I'll hunt again, and, being able to look at it from a different perspective, than what I was going in blind. So definitely the maps are a huge tool. And I think, an Onyx map is not a partner of our show in any way, shape, or form. I just want to be clear on that. But those are, in my opinion, invaluable. If you don't have one of those, would you agree? You need one?
Yeah, I don't think I could realistically get by without. I mean, to have be as efficient as you can. We talked about finding your way in the dark and having, rubs or scrapes or trails or, a lot of times on marking other hunters' sign, you're not supposed to, but there's always guys out there leaving stands, it seems like, or, trail tacks and stuff. And just putting in hunter activity, that can really go a long ways towards weeding out the spots that you don't want to hunt. I think a lot of times it's, especially on the public side of things, it's not so much looking for the best spot, it's looking for the spot that you're kind of by yourself, and it just kind of automatically means there's going to be deer there. And, going back to the going in the dark, a lot of guys like to use the trail tacks and stuff, but those shine for everybody else too. So a lot of times you don't want to be leaving sign that advertising your spots, and with some of those you can definitely find your way without advertising it to others. So something like that, sure, you can get deer without it, but it certainly makes life a lot easier.
Right. You mentioned something that surprisingly has never come up in this form or the way in which you described it, and that is hunter activity. Do you actually make a note in your GPS about hunter activity or on your Onyx map?
What I generally do, my main spots that I hunt, I have some pretty large maps that I had printed and laminated. And what I'll do is they're like wall maps. And when I go out and when I'm scouting, I'm taking notes. I got a little, little 4x4 note card thing that I carry with me that I'll write stuff down. And then when I get back, of course, I've got my GPS coordinates, the spots that look good. But on my map, I'll mark out as best I can where I was seeing other sign of hunters, a lot of times you're finding garbage and stuff, which is unfortunate, but it's definitely a telltale sign that somebody's been there. And a lot of times, if a guy takes a dry erase marker or something and you just kind of put X's or something where there's other people, over the course of a couple seasons, pretty soon you can see where the popular spots are, and then you can kind of start filling in the gaps. And, just kind of getting away from everybody else is I think in my world anyway, is every bit as important as finding actual deer sign. And, you don't even have to have one of those maps made. A lot of times those, you can print out yourself and just laminate them. That's another tool that I really am fortunate to have, is a little laminator. They're not too terribly expensive, and they, just having those maps with you when you're out in the field, and, February and March, and that when you're scouting, you can mark them up as you see fit. And if, you get them wet or something with them being laminated, they're not destroyed on you. Just little things like that. A lot of times it's not actual hunting products that you necessarily need to purchase. It's just things to kind of help make the process easier.
Any other hunter activity that you look for? I mean, I've seen the bright eyes. Which is kind of funny because that's how I killed my buck. Is there anything else other than the things like bright eyes and garbage? And you're right. It's unfortunate. Guys leave stands, or gals, whoever, or leave stands. You can tell they've been there for a year because they're, filled with leaves, and they just, they leave them. They don't leave sticks or anything with them. But, you're certainly taking a chance climbing up in that thing the following year. But is there anything else that you're really trying to avoid, or that you're marking on a map that would make you avoid an area in terms of hunter activity?
One thing that I do is, like, during the season, a lot of times, especially this year, once I was tagged out, every morning and every evening, I would drive around the properties and just get a feel for, the vehicles that were in spots. And it's funny how you can kind of start to pattern people. And I don't want to sound stalkerish here, but you drive down the road, you see a truck in one spot, you can kind of figure, well, that guy, he's hunting one or two stands most likely in that same area. You can kind of figure, well, that spot, maybe you can probably write it off. And then you just, you find the hot spots where everybody likes to go. Seems like a lot of times people are hunting cornfields or, agriculture. Otherwise, just like parking lots and that, just kind of getting away from them, or actually being right on top of them. I guess maybe that's another topic, but, you just hunter sign, just, you don't necessarily have to be in the woods to be scouting, just, kind of keeping an eye on where people are going. You see the spots that get overlooked. You see the spots that, there's a real good chance that there's going to be 10 or 12 vehicles there come opening day. And, over time, you just kind of know the spots that you probably aren't going to have a real good shot at. And then you can kind of just fill in the rest as you go.
You mentioned a couple things here. I'm trying to write down, all my thoughts, but let's just revisit this whole parking area thing, because it was essentially, that's what helped me kill my buck, was all the people being in parking areas, and for a guy who's a novice at this like I am, selfishly, I'm just curious, at what point do you say, no, not going in there because there's too many cars?
Yeah.
And I know that's a bit subjective, but overall, in a general sense, you're hunting a piece of public that's 1,000 acres, 500 acres. I mean, what's too many?
As you said, it's kind of subjective, of course, depending on the way the land lays and that. But generally, if I'm seeing 2 or 3 in a spot, usually I'm going to just go on to the next spot. I try to be the first guy there. Because part of it is, we want the best odds in our favor for getting a deer. But on the other side of things, I don't want to be walking in on somebody that's already set up and ruin their hunt. I know it's public land and everybody can kind of do as they need to, but I try to not be that guy, so to speak. So, generally I would say 2 to 3, depending on the property. Usually you got multiple access points. So if I'm seeing a bunch in one spot, I'm just going to go on down. And actually, sometimes that's not a bad thing. I can recall a couple of hunts just this season where I got a little bit late, had a few things going on or whatever. And, life happens, we get out there a little late and, the spots are filled. And a lot of times, especially during the lull, so to speak, that's a good opportunity to just go some places where there's nobody and you got nothing to lose, especially if it's a spot you've never been to or never really previously scouted it out. Just dive in there and see what's in there. And actually I got on some pretty good deer doing just that. And, just because you have your bow in your hand doesn't mean that you're not absorbing what's going on. And every hunt's a scouting trip, so to speak, as well.
Well, let's break away on that for just a second, just so I can pick your brain. What is it that you're looking for in the October lull, or what is it that gets your attention the most? I realize you've only done it 2 years, but you've been hunting a long time. So, is it still the typical, rubs and scrapes, etc., or is there anything else that you're looking for?
Sure. A lot of the property I hunt has been logged in the last 10 years or so it's really, really brushy. And a lot of times there's so much undergrowth that it's really hard to even hunt. There's a lot of times where, you go into a spot and you think it's going to lay a certain way based on your maps and stuff. And then you get in there and you go, well, how am I even going to get an arrow through here? So a lot of times during the lull, to be honest, I kind of didn't really hunt it too much in years past because, especially if you've got property to yourself, you don't want to burn bridges and that. But on the public, I thought, well, there's just no reason that when you've got all this land that you can go to, even if it's not your preferred spot, you can always go try a new spot. Just go out there and, if nothing else, you know that that's a spot you don't want to revisit down the road. So a lot of times I'm looking for terrain features, and I'm a big terrain hunter. I think that's probably more my repertoire or whatever, looking for saddles, looking for the way the ridges are, natural funnels. But probably my biggest thing is just hunting next to heavy cover where it's open enough that I can get a shot, but the deer feel secure moving there. And a lot of times you just can't tell that on a map. So, if you got a less than ideal time to be hunting, that might be a good time to jump into those areas that you've never been and kind of get a feel for the lay of the land. In February and March, you only get so much time and you try and scout out the best spots first. And then it seems like you're always wishing you'd gone into that next spot and, no time like the present to go in now. So.
You mentioned that spot. You called it that spot, and I'm assuming that means just that's something where you're going to hunt where you feel like you've got your best chances. You and I have had a couple of conversations off the air here at different times. Tell me how it is that you use terrain, and specifically, how is it that you use terrain?
Sure. And this kind of goes back to the days on Hunting Beast. Dan is just a wealth of knowledge for all different spots, and whether it's hill country or marsh and that. And that's where I actually learned a lot of this. But some examples would be he's got a thing he calls the thermal tunnel, where bucks are cruising kind of the third from the top elevation. And I've done really well hunting spots like that in hill country, just because their preferred bedding is those points generally. And just getting to that elevation, even if I'm not as stealthy as some where I can get within 100 or 75 yards of a bed, a lot of times I'm hanging back 100, 150 yards sometimes. But just getting to that area, a lot of times it's pretty amazing how many deer you actually see. And a lot of times they're smaller bucks or whatever, maybe not target animals, but you do it enough times. And over the course of a season, you do have some pretty good encounters. And then, of course, just, your saddles and your ridges. A lot of times a good terrain thing, I guess, would be just, as I mentioned before, the hunting next to the heavy cover. And I think that's something that I know Todd has really talked about, diving into those transition zones where, it may not be real thick, but it's thicker than the ground around it. And it's crazy how deer relate to just stuff like that. So a lot of times I'm just looking for things like that, knowing that the deer will relate to it. And, then in the marshes and stuff, you're looking for beds and ground where they can basically be dry, or where hunters can't get to. A lot of times that might be your terrain feature too, is anything that could keep another hunter from wanting to get there. So a lot of times I think a lot of times you're hunting deer, but you're not directly hunting deer. You're just kind of hunting them based on how they react to a situation.
Right. In my case this year, I was scouting as much as I was hunting every time that I went. I can't honestly say I had a relative amount of confidence in the spot when I was hunting it, just because I hadn't been there, with the exception of the last spot I hunted when I killed that deer. I felt like, I don't know if you've experienced the same thing, but have you ever had that aha moment, I guess, for lack of a better way of describing it, where you're on a piece of terrain, whether it be marsh, whether it be hill country, whether it just be farm country, but you're looking at it maybe from a different angle than what you looked at it before, and you go, okay, this makes sense.
Sure.
And isn't that the benefit of going out there in 3 months from now, is being able to look at it and go, okay, I see this from a different angle. I'm not having to only access it from this direction or that direction because I don't want to, mess it up. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. That's the nice thing with the spring scouting, or I guess I call it spring. It'd be, basically from when it's not horribly hard to walk through with the snow, up until turkey season and that. I love that time of year because you can go in there, you can spend as much time in an area as you need. And, when it comes to beds and stuff, you can sit right down in the beds. You can see what the deer sees. You can walk wherever you want. You're not worried about scent. A lot of times it's kind of a shed hunt too. It can kind of turn into both. And it's crazy how you might walk through a spot, 4 or 5 times and it just never clicks. And then you walk in there one day and it's just like you said, it's a aha moment. And I think that just kind of comes with experience too, with just hunting in general, not just necessarily on public. I think as we're hunting, whether we realize it or not, we're always learning. And I think we almost develop a sixth sense on what's a good spot based on what's been good to us in the past. And I've learned that when you get that feeling all of a sudden, it's definitely something you want to pay attention to. Because generally there's a reason, if something feels good, it's not always a good thing, but, generally there's a reason that something is triggering that response. And, but with the scouting, that time of year, it's nice because you can do whatever you need to do. There's generally nobody else out there. You're seeing current sign or, before everything's greened up and that, this time of year is nice if you can be scouting, but the problem is, it kind of goes back to that. You don't necessarily want to walk into spots and ruin a hunt for somebody else. So that's the nice thing with that. You don't have to worry about muddying up the waters and that. So that's a great time of year. And even in the winter, if you get a mild winter, just going out and following trails and stuff, a lot of times it'll lead you to a spot that you might not have ever really considered before.
Yeah, I don't know if you caught our one of our last podcasts, Brad Coonert. He'll literally, if he sees a buck that's out of range, and he feels like he has the time and it's the right opportunity, he'll get down and backtrack that buck's tracks all the way to where he came from. And just to gain a better understanding of where his bed is, and use that maybe the next day or the next year or whatever the case may be. But have you found yourself in those situations where you've been able to put that intel to use, by maybe backtracking or following, the trails?
Yeah, certainly. Especially with, food sources and that. A lot of times, with the crop rotations and stuff, you can kind of figure what it'll be based on what it was. And, if it was corn this year, odds are it'll probably be beans next year. So it may be a year before you can use that. But just taking notes in that, and you can never learn too much. It may seem insignificant, but stashing stuff away for a rainy day is always a good thing. I don't think you can ever learn too much while you're out there. So following current sign, whether it's tracks or, deer sightings, I think even just driving down the road and, I'm a big fan of shining. I know some folks are not allowed to do it in their areas, but seeing where deer are at, you can kind of learn their preferred feeding areas. And then just as you learn properties too, learning when the crops come off, some, the wetter grounds and stuff, they can't get in there to harvest as quick as others. And you can kind of learn what might become a preferred food source when things change. Just little stuff like that. It really makes a big difference over time. And a lot of that goes back to learning your properties. And it's tough when you got several properties that are scattered out, through several counties. I don't spend a lot of money on hunting products. I think I spend more in gas, doing stuff like that. It makes a big difference,
Thank God my wife doesn't listen to this podcast or check my, Quick Trip card, because if she knew the amount of money that I spent in gas and the amount of miles that I put on my truck this year, she'd have a coronary. I mean, I definitely gave it my all. And, you and I have talked about that. I spent a lot of time, not only here, where I live, once I got, everything figured out here, or thought I had it figured out here, then I moved. And, I just felt like I had a better chance at killing a mature deer where, it just happened to be farther away. And so I spent a lot of time. She's a 911 dispatcher, so often she has to work at night. So in the summers, that worked great. Me and Chloe, our 6-year-old, would jump in the truck, and I'd plug a movie into her little player, and away we would go for hours. And there's no substitute for that stuff, especially, again, when you're coming into it green. You don't have that intel like we've been talking about. There's no substitute for, putting your eyes on something. And then again, there's no substitute for putting your feet on the ground either, is there?
No, no matter how you look at it, you still got to get out there and do the work. And I think that's where a lot of people come up short, even on private land. The trail cameras and stuff are nice. The maps are great. I do go in blind a lot. But there's still no substitution for getting out there and doing the work. There's just so many things that you pick up that you just can't see from a map from 50,000 feet up or from the road. Just little things. And I think that's where people get sidetracked too, is, you look at a property that's, let's say 500 to 1,000 acres. It's a big chunk of land compared to what a lot of us are used to hunting. You can't just expect to dive into that and pick it all up in 1 year unless you've just got an obscene amount of time to dedicate to it. You just kind of got to know that it's going to take time. You do as much as you can and just figure a 2 to 3 year learning curve. And, you just got to kind of expect it to be that way. And you do the best with what you have. And, as long as you're receptive when you're out there, pretty soon you start figuring them out, and you scout a few areas here, and then the next year, I've already been in there, so I'm going to try some new stuff. And that's a great time, like I said, with the October lull, so to speak. Just if you've never been into a spot and you don't know what's there, you certainly don't have anything to lose, and just jumping in there and figuring it out. You don't necessarily have to have a arrow shot to have a successful hunt in that regard.
Right, absolutely. I mean, I felt like every time, my goodness, the first time I saw a deer this year, I felt like I had just won the entire war. But all I had really done is won a battle, and fortunately for me, unfortunately, there were the sightings were few and far between, and I think a lot of that is because of my lack of knowledge of the area prior to going in there. So I was doing a lot of it on the fly. It didn't stop me from harvesting one, but it definitely can hurt. Speaking of that, I guess that ties right into the next thing. How important would Brad Lamont say that confidence is?
I think
when you're sitting in a tree.
Sure, I think confidence is everything. Some buddies and we were just talking about this last week. Bow hunting is a physical sport. I mean, it's setting up the stands and drawing the bow, but I think it's 90% mental and just keeping our head in the game, just knowing that you've scouted out a spot. I think that's one of the best things with scouting is, of course, it helps you find spots, but just knowing what you've seen. There's a lot more time when we're sitting there that we're not seeing deer than when than when we have them in front of us. And just running trail cameras in the summer, getting out there in the spring or whenever you have time to scout, driving around, just sightings, knowing what's there does wonders for your confidence. And especially when you transition to the public thing, I think just kind of keeping our head right is probably one of the hardest battles of all. You drive down the road, you see all these cars parked there, knowing that they have just as much right as anybody to be there. And sometimes it does get discouraging. And just knowing that there's several good bucks out there on that property that they may not even know that are there, it does good to, when you know that in the back of your mind, when times get tough, you can kind of stay positive and stay focused there. And you may not even be finding rubs or scrapes or trails or, beds. When you're out there spring scouting, you might come up on a set of fresh tracks in the snow. And, when you start seeing 3 and 4 finger tracks, that's made by a pretty decent buck. So a lot of times, without even visually seeing the deer, that something's there. So that helps too. The confidence side of it is absolutely huge.
No, I agree. It's a whole. Well, first of all, it's a whole lot easier sitting there for the bulk of an afternoon if you feel like you're in the game, rather than hoping you're in the game. Let's jump back for just a second, and it's something that I've often thought about, especially around here where I live, and that is crops. There's very, very little public land that has crops that are huntable. Are you in an area where you're able to hunt crops, or are you? And if you are, I understand how you would do that because that's relatively simple to figure out. But if you're not, if it's adjoining land, how is it that you go about attacking that?
Sure. Some of my spots have crops, and sometimes some of them are a mile or so away. And that kind of comes back to the mapping thing. When you find a property, I think one of the first things you want to do is just kind of get an idea of where the bedding is and then where the crops are going to be. And if it's a mile away, we know that we're probably going to be keying in on a lot of acorns and stuff like that, especially early season. And then, if it's a square property, let's say, if it's off to one side, we know that that's probably going to be likely the travel route. It gets trickier when there's multiple food sources and none of them are close. But every property is a little different there. And, just kind of, there again, you kind of figure them out as you go in that. But some public has it where you can lease ground from the DNR and plant. Sometimes, if we're on MFL land or forest crop law land, there's adjoining properties, just driving the roads and kind of figuring those out. But yeah, it's definitely something you want to pay attention to, and not all properties have them. I'm not really at the stage where I can routinely just go into the big woods yet. I know some guys, that's their favorite thing to do, but I still tend to favor the spots where there's agriculture areas, at least fairly close. I'm not saying they necessarily have to be on the property, but it definitely, I think, does make it a little easier. The guys that are doing it up north in the big woods where the closest fields are 5-6 miles away, they definitely have my utmost respect. That's
yeah. I'm not sure how they do that. Yeah, exactly. So, has it been your experience then, if there's crop fields, say a mile away, that those deer will travel a mile? And if you're, I guess, how do you know that they're going to travel a mile?
That's where the shining really comes in. What I'll generally do is I'll be running trail cameras and stuff, and you kind of get an idea of what bucks are in your area, and running them in different spots throughout the properties. I'm limited on cameras. I only have 7 of them, so I generally run them for 2 weeks at a time. But then you kind of find what bucks you may be after on your list, and then just driving around. And it's tough in the summers and that till the crops come off. So that kind of goes to that 2 to 3 year plan, figuring out as you go. But even then, you can find deer on the sides of, cornfields or that sort of thing. And you just do that enough times, you kind of figure out that they are indeed traveling that far. I think that was one of the things I really struggled with, was I didn't realize deer traveled as far as they do. Actually, the buck I shot this year, a buddy of mine found out a week or so later that one of the people he knew had pictures of him from 2.5 miles away from where I shot him, on a spot that's way off the public. And he had a unique enough rack that we were able to, figure out that it was him. And I think they go a lot further than we think they do a lot of times, but, I guess I always kind of pictured them more as homebodies, and especially on some of these public spots where the crops are a ways away, they're moving further than we thought they are.
You mentioned trail cameras, and I'm just curious, how many have you gotten stolen? No, actually, I don't even want to think about that, because it's happened more often than I would have expected it to this year to me. But what's your game plan with a trail camera? From where in the tree do you place it? How do you place it? And what determines where it is that you're going to stick that camera? When are you sticking them out there? All that, 365 days a year. Is it just, do you put them out in July, August? What do you do?
Sure. To be honest, I didn't really run a lot of cameras up until this year. I had 2 or 3 of them, and a lot of times I was seeing the same deer without them. But when I got on the public thing, just knowing, it kind of goes to that confidence thing. Whether or not I was seeing these deer while hunting, I wanted to know at least what was there. I guess I don't necessarily use them so much to know what the deer is doing, because I think that's changing so much throughout the season based on pressure and food and that. So it's kind of tough to necessarily pattern them with them. But I started running them in March, and actually what I did was, I don't tend to buy the real expensive cameras for public, just because there is always the threat of them getting stolen. I like to buy the $75 to $100 range cameras, and buying them used. I picked up a few used ones this year for pretty good prices. Sometimes they're a little bit older, but as long as they're taking clear pictures, that's really all I needed. And what I generally do is in March and that, it's not quite as leery leaving them out there, because I don't think there's near the human activity. But I really got serious with it in July. And I knew, I'm in an area of Wisconsin where I'm not allowed to use any minerals or attractants. So I didn't figure I would get too many deer just walking in front of a camera. And a lot of my spots are pretty remote, where there's not necessarily trails or anything. So what I kind of started doing was doing the mock scrapes, even in July and August and September. And I got quite a few pictures this year just doing that. And a lot of times, being it's, scrape, there's does that come through occasionally, but you're pretty much getting all bucks, which is kind of nice, because you're not having to weed through all the doe pictures. And depending on the spot, it kind of depends on how I was setting it up. If it's really remote and I don't think there's much chance of anybody being there, Sometimes I'd leave those at, normal heights. And then, of course, I'd always leave like a Python cable lock on them. If I was in spots where there was a greater chance of somebody discovering it, I'd take my climbing sticks out with me, and I'd generally get up, 2 sticks high. And Stick and Pick has a really nice bracket that's a strap-on mount, and that really works good because you can angle it right to where you want it. And in my case, I was using mock scrapes, and you can get it right on that. And the deer don't seem to mind when it's up that high either. I noticed when I had them on the ground, I do get a lot more pictures where it's a one-and-done event with a certain buck. Whereas when it's up in the air, he might keep coming every 2 or 3 days or whatever. And I never had any cameras stolen this year, knock on wood. So I think that's partly going to the spots where nobody wants to go, and then just putting them where they can't get to them, and certainly padlocking them helps too.
So you padlock all of them?
Yeah. Even though
okay. Oh, really? Okay. Yeah, I put everything. I'm 6'4", 6'5", so I can get a long ways on one stick. And I started, after you told me about it, that's what I started to do as well, is put them on mock scrapes, and it definitely works, and you're not dealing with a lot of does. However, I would say that I got just as many does as bucks. And I again, one thing that you emphasized, and I would want to re-emphasize, is I don't think that very many people have ever killed a buck as a result of, geographically where they got that buck on trail camera. Now, yes, I think it was a help because they knew it was there, and it was working in daylight, or it wasn't working in daylight, or walking in daylight. Obviously, that's a time to go after them, but they're a nice tool to have. And like you said, Stick and Pick makes that mount that straps around a tree. For those of you who don't know about it, in Wisconsin, you can't screw anything into the tree. So you've got to strap those on, and they're rock solid. They're great.
Yeah, and the other thing with trail cameras too is, you find these spots in early of the year, and you think you've got a pretty decent spot, and you put up some cameras, and even though it's middle of July, when you're getting 2 or 3 decent bucks on there, that does wonders for your confidence too, whether it's a deer you ever see again. The bucks I had on camera, I probably had, between my properties that I was hunting, I probably had 30 to 40 different bucks on camera, and a lot of those are 1 and 2 year old bucks, but I never actually physically saw one of them in the woods that I had on camera. But the bucks I ended up taking, the one I got, I'd never seen him before in my life, but I knew it was an area where I'd seen other good ones. So, if it's good for one, it's probably good for more. So that kind of helps with the confidence too.
Well, hey, I've taken a lot of your time here. Any final thoughts before I let you go?
Sure. I'm just going to kind of cover one thing that I had always kind of thought about doing but never actually implemented, was just doing the water approach. And I know John Eberhardt really kind of talks about that, getting across a barrier, whether it's water or, a terrain, really steep hills and stuff. But I'd always wanted to do that, and that really opened some doors for me this year. Actually, about a month ago, I picked up a canoe, and that was my girlfriend thought I was.
I still have
crazy.
The text message.
Yeah, I got some strange looks when I pulled this up. Apparently, they didn't think I was going to be a sailor, but I just had it in my mind that this definitely opens up some possibilities, and with the rivers and creeks and streams and stuff in Wisconsin, and even the lakes, there's a lot of good land that you can get to pretty quickly with a boat. That and it doesn't necessarily have to be a canoe or a kayak, even a regular boat, but some spots you can't get back with a regular boat. That just opened the door, and that's actually probably the thing that contributed more to my hunt this year was just getting to land. I'd never even stepped foot on it. I'd looked at some maps and stuff, and I knew enough that I needed to get in there. But it certainly worked when you get one, I'll say that. But that's something, if you haven't tried, I think everybody that's hunting the pressured areas definitely give it a shot. It's a little leery when you go out there in the dark and you could be tipping this thing over, but the reward is definitely worth it.
Well, there you have it, my conversation with Brad Lamont. I hope you found some useful tips there. Brad's certainly a wealth of knowledge, as he's tried just about everything. I'll not ever forget the text he sent me when he picked up that canoe, which helped him harvest the buck that he got this fall. So I just want to remind everyone that we can use your review on iTunes. If you don't know how to do that, go ahead and email me at jason@whiteknuckleproductions.com. I'll be more than happy to show you how to do that. If you use Stitcher, I don't know anything about Stitcher, but I will absolutely find out. So email me if you have a question about giving us a review. The bottom line is we need your reviews, and they would greatly help. Also, if you have an idea for a show for next year, this was our first year of doing this. It's been a tremendous success. We've had, both Todd and myself have had a ton of fun doing it, and we will absolutely continue to do it next year. We're already trying to line up guests and start a schedule for the upcoming year. We're going to do some of the same things that we did last year, and we will do some new things. So we're really looking forward to the year to come, and we're looking also forward to what is to come the rest of this year. White Knuckle as a team has had a great season so far. So we are really looking forward to bringing that whole season to you in the upcoming year. We're super excited about that. We've got some dandy stories and some dandy bucks. So as always, we look forward to bringing those to you in the upcoming year. With that, I think I'll close out the show because I've stuffed enough of my foot in my mouth. Again, please give us a review. And also, if you haven't taken advantage of that Ozonics offer, the Ozonics HR 200 and 300, they've now extended the 300 offer, $100 off on either one of those. That's a deal, guys and gals. If you want an Ozonics unit and you want one for Christmas or whatever, tell your significant other that they should get online and buy one. With that, I think I'm about out of energy and out of things to say. So, Jason out.